We're talking about all things that fly today. And no, I'm not talking about stocks that go to the moon. I'm talking about drones with CEO of Draganfly, Chell. Cameron, welcome back to the show. Last time we had you, we talked about cryptos. Now we're going to talk about drones, your other business. I love drones. I got a few myself. So looking forward to talking about this with you. All right, tell us about your company. You don't make consumer drones, right?
No, we don't. So Draganfly is the oldest commercial drone manufacturer in the world. We've been manufacturing drones since 1996. And, we've seen the full evolution of this industry and are really excited about the fact that it's really coming of age. Sure. Draganfly is the company that developed the Draganfly Commander, which is the first drone that was ever credited with saving a human life. And that drone today sits on permanent display in the Smithsonian.
Okay, let's talk first to be about your company share performance, and then we'll talk about the products and the operations and the future of droning. So your company is listed as DPRO and up 100% from a year ago. So you were trading at around $2 a share. Now you're at 433 Canadian. I'm looking at the Canadian price. It's down significantly from the top this year, though. What happened this year?
Well, I think a couple of things have happened. First of all, just the general small cap markets on the NASDAQ have come down significantly in that time frame. And if you look at our chart compared to the other drone charts out there, really they kind of mirror that same perspective. So we think that price is reflective of the sentiment in the market. However, what differentiates Draganfly is that certainly from the quantitative analysis that we've been able to do in the data that we have, we are the best performing financial company out there in terms of revenue growth. We're 100% 200% year over year for the last 2 years. We're 50% for the last 5 years or the last 5 quarters cumulatively, and we really have our pipelines bursting at the seams. So we really don't see any end in sight for this type of growth, and think we have the experience and the team in place to be able to execute.
Great. Let's talk about the company. Now, you make industrial use drones primarily. What are your major customer bases? Is it primarily American demographics?
Yeah, 90% of our revenue is in the U.S. Public safety has been our stalwart, if you will, for the last number of years. For the last 20 plus years. We do have hundreds of customers, and customers come to us for total solution packages. But whether it's in education or agriculture or mining or forestry, we provide total solutions for those industries. We're seeing tremendous growth in various verticals of delivery as well right now, but public safety still continues to be our main focus. And primarily those customers come to us because of our AI capabilities and our ability to deliver a total solution.
Have you considered going into the consumer market?
Yeah, we feel that the consumer market is really based more on hardware features and options, and those tend to be, a race to the bottom in terms of pricing and margin. Certainly, the foreign manufacturers will continue to dominate that space, in our opinion. And but when you're looking at time-sensitive or data-sensitive, mission-critical, security paramount type of missions, the reliance on North American manufacturing, the reliance on a 23-year-old brand, the reliance on a company that's done military work in the past, public safety work in the past, education work in the past, those are the companies that the industrial large purchasers are now coming to and looking for Draganfly's history and credibility.
Okay. What do you think about Amazon's plan to deliver through drones? I mean, they've tried that. It's had varying degrees of success.
Yeah, listen, it is just a matter of time before we see a lot of delivery happening, last mile delivery, because being done with drones. It's just highly efficient, highly automated, and quite frankly, it would be one of the only ways that we'll be able to keep up with this delivery type, instant economy. However, I do think that the consumer delivery industry is a little further out than what a lot of people anticipate. A lot of our focus in the delivery space has been with emergency response systems, with government agencies and such. And so we've recently announced a phase $1 million project, $750,000 project, where we're designing emergency medical response services within the state of Texas to be able to deliver things like medical supplies and provide data back to first responders as they roll trucks into a situation for a disaster response scenario. Those have budget now. Those have immediate ROI, and those are the types of things that we'll see rolled out en masse, I think, quicker than we see, a Pizza Hut delivery. That said, Amazon will be successful in this regard, and so will Google. And there will be an entire ecosystem of consumer delivery. Where we play is providing solutions, technology, AI into that system to the various players, including the hundreds of other customers that will emerge in this particular space.
But you wouldn't consider actually making drones for Google and Amazon?
Well, I think because of the large patent portfolio we have, you'll end up seeing our technology being used likely across many fleets, including maybe potentially those fleets. But we do manufacture drones for customers and competitors in that space, and we do provide turnkey solutions to similar companies to that. So I wouldn't rule it out, but to those particular customers that we'll be servicing, but certainly to the broader market that would be also in the space along with Google and Amazon, will be a provider and supplier.
Well, let's talk about regulation now, because with the advent of drones, I mean, this is a relatively new technology in the fact that, in the sense that it's been just recently adopted by the masses in the last 15, 20 years or so. So we're seeing more stringent regulations from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, the body that governs all the airspace in the U.S. And so as this technology develops, as more consumers and industries start using drones en masse, what do you think is going to happen with regulation? Are we going to see potentially air highways for drones? Are we going to see stricter controls in the traffic? What's going to happen?
Yeah. So what we've seen, Draganfly, luckily we've been in this business for 23 years, and we've seen the promise and the hope of the drone industry many times, kind of bubble up and come to the forefront. But really, when it accelerates every single time is when we get clear view on regulation. And over the last 18 months in particular, the FAA has been excellent at providing that guidance and regulation. They've spent the last 15 years determining how are drones going to fit into our infrastructure, into our economy, and into the airspace. And the more regulation they provide, the more that industry and business looks at, okay, now we can calculate clear ROIs on how and what the use cases are and when they can be implemented. And since the last couple of announcements, major announcements, we'll call it, over the last year to year and a half, that's when we saw our business go from selling and educating our customers to taking orders, to finding solutions, to spending more time engineering and building products than we have spent selling before. Right now, the industry is completely inundated with new opportunities because of this clarity. Now, the other part of it is, and where we're seeing, and what we're seeing happen now, is that the FAA is also getting very particular on who and how participates in this industry, because of the potential dangers of things overhead and flying at objects and things like that. It needs to be regulated tightly. But that regulation serves companies like Draganfly, who have the history that we do, very well. It creates a barrier of entry of upstarts to come into the very serious part of this industry, which obviously have the largest potential market growth and potential and revenue opportunities.
I want to ask you about the air taxi business, which is evolving as we speak today. Very exciting. I just read the news. Hyundai is building airports all around the world, urban airports, and they're building the first one in England, actually. So they plan to build around 65 taxi hubs, they call it, worldwide. Now, these are going to be literally air taxis. And of course, the technology is very similar to what you're doing. They're just larger scale drones. Tell us about how this industry is going to be evolving.
Well, this will be a heavily regulated industry, and the players in this industry are more likely than not to be the very large players. I wouldn't expect to see small upstarts or very many, if any, really surviving the 15-year cash burn it's going to be required in order to survive in this space. So you'll see players like Hyundai, you'll see players like Boeing or Sky or Airbus, as the major eventual players in this particular area, with one or two startups that will end up playing. That would be my prediction. There's a long way to go in terms of regulation in this space. Now, the potential of this industry is billions and billions and billions of dollars. So there will be a lot of people chasing it. There will be a lot of incredible technology that will be developed by smaller companies that will be adopted by the larger eventual dominant players in this space. So in terms of an investment strategy, I think there's lots of opportunity for people to play in the small cap or mid cap space here. But in terms of an eventual airline or delivery or major player in it, I would look to one of the national or the international players there to be dominating in this area.
So how long before we start hailing our cabs with flying taxis and we all go to work in a flying car?
Well, I hate to burst anybody's bubble, but I think it's 15 years.
15 years? That's not too far away.
I do think it is that long. I do think in limited cases and specific scenarios, maybe theme parks or work complexes or things like that, we could start to see it as short as 5 years from now in a relatively not uncommon practice. But in terms of public airspace and such, I think there's a solid decade to go yet.
I think the entire sort of traffic industry ecosystem is going to have to change, right? We're talking about not just, building codes, safety codes around cities. We're talking about sensors, talking about potentially new traffic laws and lights and everything. Like, how is our skyline going to change?
Yeah, the logistics of doing this are really, it's not about technology. The technology exists for this to happen today, but the interdependencies of all the other industries and infrastructure and economy and airspace that you have so appropriately mentioned that have to fit into this, and then the regulatory environment around that, it's just going to take time to move that forward. So in a private sense, or in some particular areas, maybe some tourist areas, maybe in some island states, maybe in some U.S. territories that are island states, which I think you can look for some exciting stuff from us in that regard. Those are the types of areas that we'll see it. But in terms of downtown New York or L.A., it's a long ways off.
Well, where do you think is the first place or country to possibly adopt this? Is it going to be in the U.S. or is it going to be abroad, Europe, Asia?
Yeah, I think things like I do think on a private sector it will be in U.S. or first world countries, but it will be in what I'm calling private airspace. So theme parks or tourist areas or large work complexes and things like that. That'll be good testing ground, and there's some good practicality and some ROI that can be calculated around that. Yeah. But in general, beyond that, I think you're probably looking at second world nations where there aren't highways, or where they're island nations, or where the air regulation isn't quite as strict. Doesn't mean it's not as safe. It just means it might not have as many interdependencies to work through the regulatory environment before it can be completely, practical. And there's many of those in the Pacific Rim or in the Asian belt that I think are probably leading the charge there. Now,
you mentioned AI is a big component of your portfolio. Yeah. Are you suggesting that drones will be self-autonomous in flight? Are they not going to be piloted?
Well, in order for the delivery market, for example, to really be successful en masse, it will have to be autonomous. Now, it will launch as fully functioning manual systems, which we are starting to see today. It will very quickly move into semi-autonomous operations, where you've got multiple or dozens of drones operating from one operator, from a control center, which you see that type of software and some of those use cases rolling out now. But in 5 years, in order for this to be to handle the scale of things like delivery, or handle the scale of the amount of EMS calls that a state or a country has to deal with at once, it'll have to be autonomous on-call operations.
Okay, and security obviously is a concern. Are you? How do you plan to respond to critics who say, "Well, this kind of system can be hacked"?
Well, any type of system can be potentially hacked, and so whether it's a subway system or whether it's the current airline system, there are sufficient safeguards in place right now to help ensure that the safety is paramount. But like all things, they are going to be looking at trusted sources and trusted personnel and trusted organizations in order to design and operate these, and that's why we think Draganfly has a distinct advantage.
Okay. Just bring up the military now. Do you think drones, autonomous drones, will replace manned piloted aircrafts in the future?
I do.
You do? Okay.
It's that simple. Yeah, maybe not wholly, and maybe not for every single mission, but we've already got partner drones that are being tested as full flight aircraft. Not us personally, but militaries around the world do. To fly as wingmen, and again, there are certain missions that just the risk profile and the cost profile will be such that it will just make sense to do that.
So if that's the trajectory of the military, why is the government spending so much money on F-35s, F-22s? I mean, what is the advantage, technically speaking, from a drone over a piloted aircraft like an F-22?
Yeah, well, not every use case, certainly in our lifetime, is going to be one where an autonomous drone or an autonomous fighter aircraft or something should be taking on that mission. But if we think about everything, we think about things like surveillance right now. I mean, they're in many respects almost in some, if you think through satellites and stuff, they already are autonomous. There will be lots of everything like cargo missions and fueling missions and safety missions, or even search and rescue missions, that part of them will be within the next 5 years will be handled autonomously, or at least semi-autonomously. In terms of full complex, combat type missions, that's still a ways out. And so in the meantime, you still have a generation or two of aircraft that are going to have to continue to fill that gap. And the key thing about AI and being able to do that is it needs the data. And so, until absolutely every mission profile is flown, and the more data and more, you can't build AI around it as well. So there's still 20 years of AI to put in place before we really have, probably what some people are thinking in a sci-fi perspective around, true autonomous missions being flown in some sort of combat capacity.
I believe they've made movies about this. I think it's called Skynet. I think people have warned against fully autonomous self-guided machines and weapons, but that's a conversation for another time. I want to talk about the adoption of drones now. So now you've got different industries. We've talked about the military, we've got industries, we've got the retail industry, we've got consumers. So how far along are we in the adoption curve, where let's say 100% would mean everybody in that particular sector is utilizing a drone?
I think depending on the industry, from a sentiment analysis standpoint, some industries are 100% there. Some industries are moving rapidly into the adoption and the use of drones, just because the ROI is just so prevalent. So if we think about things like offshore delivery to oil rigs, or and the list goes on. That stuff, it just makes total and complete sense. If we think about things like drones flying through our neighborhood, to deliver, pizza, I actually think we're a little further away than we'd like to imagine on that. There's some very basic things just to conquer in terms of, the annoyance value and noise and noise pollution and, things that, like I'm one of those dads that, look, if I'm at a soccer game and somebody throws up a drone, I'm the first person to get annoyed about it and politely say, hey, do you have the right sign off to this? What are you filming? The noise is distracting, it's intrusive. That said, from a very practical standpoint, as we develop these highways over top, and as future generations come along, and when I say future generations, I mean, my kids aren't annoyed by the noise of a drone, but I am. But so that's only 5 years out, before 6 or 7 years out, before they're making in a position where that acceptance level is increasing. So again, this is just a matter of time, and I think 10 years from now they'll just be wondering, what was the big deal.
Let's talk about finally the technological improvements of drones that we can see over the next coming decade, starting with battery technology. Do you think lithium-ion batteries are going to be the end-all and be-all to power storage?
Well, that's I think for the foreseeable future they are, and I think the improvements that are happening in that particular area are incredible. I do think there's bigger innovation that's coming. I think there's other innovation that will happen in terms of battery technology that will even surpass this type of what we would call the standard or what's happening today. But certainly, drones and electric are natural, and so while we still see some gas motors on drones for particular types of missions, the future is electric for drones.
Okay, and what about What about the engine profile? So we've got motors right now, rotors. Can they potentially switch to jets or anything from a sci-fi
they are.
realm?
It's again, it's a matter of practicality. So certainly when you start putting a turbine on a drone, it's a different mission profile. It's a heavier drone. It's longer range. Now you're not talking necessarily electric, or excuse me. You're not talking electric. So again, all of it's possible, but it really, in terms of, you've got to come up with the use cases that drive ROI for customers to adopt it. And so while we've seen some interesting turbine stuff in the commercial space for drones, it's not practical or scalable just quite yet.
So you think rotor drones are still the more practical solution for your domestic use, consumer use, and potentially deliveries and retail use?
Yeah, they are. I mean, just from a cost perspective, from a maintenance perspective, from a power usage perspective, I mean, that's certainly the future for the next 10 years plus.
All right, and finally, let's tie this back to Draganfly. How do you plan to deliver shareholder value and maximize shareholder return over the next coming years?
We see that there will be a North American one or two players that will become dominant in the North American space. And while we see our competitors right now still very focused again, and we've seen this cycle like 3 or 4 times in our history, they're very focused again on features and functions of the hardware. And that hardware being the airframe in particular. Really, an airframe is an airframe, and you can do incredible engineering with it. But the key is not to be focused on that hardware. And what Draganfly focuses on is that total solution. And because we can do everything from design and build and manufacturing and software and AI and analytics, we can deliver a type of solution to a larger customer that our other competitors just can't do right now. So our absolute focus is to be that number 1 or number 2 player in the drone industry, North American based, over the next number of years.
Excellent. Cameron, thank you so much for coming on Kitco. I appreciate your thoughts.
David, always so great to talk with you.
Very interesting discussion. And thank you for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lin. Stay tuned for more.